The last significant change in the way we educated our kids occurred around 124 years ago. It was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Most kids were raised on farms, and jobs were plentiful and predictable. Then, in 1843, an educator from Massachusetts decides to visit Prussia on his honeymoon, where he witnesses a brand new type of education. Up until that time, education primarily consisted of smart people sitting around talking to other smart people. But after the Prussians were embarrassed in the Napoleonic Wars in the 1800s, this Prussian decides to institute a new type of education for every German boy from 7 to 14 years old, which results in a more fit, more organized, more obedient army. Among his many reforms was this idea: to divide up instruction according to age, ability, and subject matter. Strange as it seems today, this had never been done before. This idea of teaching math in one room, science in another room, language skills in yet another was totally new. Horace Mann witnesses this new educational model and he's stunned. Inspired by what he sees, he brings these educational ideas back to the U.S. where it captures the attention of these men. Just like the Prussians, who were anxious to develop more obedient troops, these fathers of the Industrial Revolution were desperate to transform our nation of disorganized farm laborers into trained, efficient workers for their factory and assembly line jobs.
We divide the day up in high schools into bits of time, into 40 or 50-minute blocks typically, and then we ring bells and people start to shuffle around the building and do something else. That's an organizational device, it's not an educational principle. And it is, in broad sweeps, a system that resembles a factory culture.
If you built a factory in upstate New York and another along the Ohio River, you desperately needed these workers to behave similarly, to know the same kinds of things. If high school graduates in Ohio could quote Shakespeare, but students in New York couldn't even write their own name, it was difficult to build a standard set of factories which utilized both sets of workers. That's when it was decided to form a committee called the Committee of 10. The committee was tasked with coming up with a standard set of subjects every kid should know.
10 university heads in 1890 said, in 11th grade, everyone should learn chemistry. In senior year, everyone should learn physics, and that it should be earth science. They came up with this whole trajectory calculus, and a lot of these subjects are great, but these priorities were dictated 120 years ago, 124 years ago.
Back in 1892, the Committee of 10 designed our nation's curriculum, and for the most part, it has not changed.
The biggest employer in Baltimore 50 years ago was Bethlehem Steel Company. You could actually drop out of high school 50 years ago, join the steel union, get a perfectly average job, earning a perfectly average wage, which would entitle you to get a perfectly average mortgage, to buy a perfectly average house, with a perfectly average yard, to have 2.0 perfectly average kids, who would go to a wonderful, perfectly average public school. You could have a perfectly average retirement and have a perfectly average funeral. That is no longer the case.
The economy that we created over the course of the 20th century was an economy that needed a large number of moderately skilled people who could do the 3 R's and who could follow pretty simple instructions. As we head deeper into the 21st century, I really don't think that's the case anymore, yet our educational system still seems to be focused on turning out people with that same relatively small set of skills. My fear is that they're heading into a society and an economy and a workforce that doesn't value those skills very much anymore. And I think we need to take a good hard look and figure out what kinds of people, what kinds of skills are demanded in the technologically extraordinary society and economy that we're creating.